Good evening. I'm Rudy El-Khouri, Dean of the School of Architecture. Thank you for joining us this evening, virtually and in person for our new installment in the Tecnoglass lecture series at the University of Miami School of Architecture. We have joining us from Singapore tonight, Ling Hao, my colleague, Jaime Correa will introduce in a minute. Just like to take an opportunity to thank our sponsors, Tecnoglass, who are supporting us now for the 6th year. Their generosity has enabled us to be very ambitious with our programming as usual, and we have a great series this year. I remind you to take a look at our program to make sure to attend the future lectures. So tonight is a hybrid lecture we have students here on site at Glasgow Hall in the School of Architecture, and some are joining us virtually online. But also following the lecture, we're going to have a panel discussion with our guest speaker, and we have the speakers here tonight in person. I am going to let Jaime introduce our guest lecturers and the panelists for tonight.
Thank you, Dean. I'm Jaime Correa. I'm an associate professor in practice at the School of Architecture of the University of Miami and the coordinator of this lecture series. On behalf of the School of Architecture of the University of Miami and Tecnoglass, I would like to welcome you to a Tecnoglass honor lecture by Ling Hao. He's from Singapore, where it is already 8 o'clock in the morning on Thursday, November the 12th. But before we start, let me remind you to keep your microphones off at all times, and please do not attempt to share your screen or annotate at any time. If you do, you will be removed and not allowed to come back. At the end of this lecture, we will have a panel discussion led by distinguished professors Joe Lamire and Juan Yactayo. There will also be an opportunity for questions and answers. So if you have any questions or if you need any type of clarification, please use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. Tonight, we're honored to have with us Ling Hao. Ling Hao founded his office in the year 2000 in Singapore. And as you know, Singapore is the city-state island said to have shifted from third world to first world in one single generation, and under the government of Lee Kuan Yew from 1959 to 1990. Ling Hao was born in 1968 in Kuching, Sarawak in East Malaysia, and he graduated from the University of New South Wales in Australia. 1993, he moved to Singapore to join Tangguanbee Architects, where he worked for about 5 years. 1998, he founded Ham Architects with Tang Kong Meng. Hao grew up in the 1960s in a concrete compound house, a word that is said to come from kampong, which is the Malaysian word for village. This is a building type to which he refers constantly in his professional work, a type where the ground floor is completely open, allowing the opportunity to experience the exuberant environment of South Asia. Ling Hao's practice is underpinned by the keen observation and study of the tremendous transformations that have taken place in and around Singapore, and how old and new inhabitants populate these areas. His architectural thinking is attracted by soft spaces delimited by curtains, plants, and promenades. Such elements are clearly seen in the Tea House of 2011 and in the open air food pavilion at Satay by the Bay of 2012. Both of these projects were recipients of the President's Design Award in Singapore in 2013 and 2014. In 2015, he won the award, President's Design Award, once again. Nowadays, when he speaks of his work, he uses a specific vocabulary that reflects his understanding of an architecture which is set in the conditions of the equatorial climate, including tactile materials and textures, actions in space, experiences of space, and a blurring of boundaries between inside and outside. Ling Hao has taught at various institutions, including RMIT La Salle, NAFA, National University of Singapore, and he has been an associate professor of the Singapore University of Technology. And most importantly, and this is how we became aware of his amazing work, he was a workshop leader at the Porto Academy in 2018, where two of our own faculty members, Soter and Von Moos, got to meet him. So on behalf of the School of Architecture of the University of Miami and Tecnoglass, please let's welcome Ling Hao.
Thank you. Hi, are you able to see my screen? Okay. So okay. You can all hear me. I'll begin. Thank you for the very generous introduction, Jaime, and to the Rodolfi for this great opportunity to present my work. So I will begin. So as it was introduced, I have been living in Singapore for now about 20 over years. So this is I will show a great many images, many scenes of the scenery of Singapore and my work. So this is a view of the housing in Singapore, the social housing, where more than 80% of the Singaporeans live in. So I live in such an environment. So what you see here would be 20 to 30 story high rises, which built from the 1970s. And beyond would be the sea, and Singapore is a kind of an island. But also on the ground, what you see would be these trees which in your natural environment spread out to over 30 meters. So they are called the rain trees. Every day, when it rains, the leaves will shut. Before it rains, the leaves will shut. Also, every day at about 5 in the evening, the leaves will also shut. What do you say? But these trees originally come from Brazil. So they were brought over, during that kind of the era of the colonial period, where the trees were brought all around different parts of the world for different kind of purposes. So, so these flats all rise from the ground, and the ground would be open. So as I'm trying to evoke a kind of a scene where there would be a kind of a continuous air breeze that would make this environment quite rich. Yeah. It also means that over this period, this is an extract from a magazine in the 1970s, in the architectural magazine. And in that era, in the 1970s and 80s, the discussion would be about how to make a kind of a efficient and economic kind of layout. So this is a typical kind of a housing layout where a substantial amount of Singaporeans have become used to. This has been their everyday. Where the, hold on, so there would be a kind of a breeze through these flats. So these flats would be about 10 to 15 meters in depth. And the depth of these 10 to 15 meters allows this kind of breeze to move through. This is a drawing of a family that have been living in this flat for about 20 years. And the kind of everyday where the behavior is related to the layout. Also, when they moved into these high rises, they would have to learn new behaviors, which involve in these pictures here, in these drawings here, how you hang your laundry. So this laundry that sticks out, let's say on the 20th floor, 20th story, and for you to take advantage of the breeze. And in a way also how you struggle in relation to the wind. But at the same time, in that period, in the all the way to the 80s and 90s, there was still this kind of scenery. So this is drawings from a book by a Malaysian artist. And in the old world, so-called the world which in this kind of area for the natives who were the Malays, the floor was where they lived in, and the partitions within the interior were permeable. But also meant that in the everyday of that world, the surroundings would be where they grew up, where the young would play in relation to the whole environment. So living meant not just in a home, but in relation to a bigger surroundings. So this is the void deck, the open area of the housing area. And in a kind of a rare scene, the kids here use the public space as their playground. So this is in a way, I guess what I'm trying to say, kind of the new world. And a recent publication in Singapore, where this open space on the ground floor, called the void deck, has become also a home for the cats. And some friends did this book where they made a kind of a study of the different cats and how the behaviors of the different cats in this kind of void deck. And this, housing, this building of Singapore is ongoing. The population is increasing, and the flats are also getting bigger. And the spaces between the flats, if you compare with the first scene that I showed, have become nearer. And the scale of the spaces to the flats and the plants have changed. And this is the latest manifestation of this kind of ideal layout. And they have become much more interiorized. They are generally more rooms, and the windows are towards one side, and the ventilation is much less, and therefore it also starts meaning that there is now much more of a provision for the air condition, a kind of a mechanical world. So how do you imagine living in this kind of world where things have become more interiorized? One scenario would be to demolish these walls. And if you can see the scenery beyond, which is green, because this is really right on the edge of Singapore where they're building up to now. And you color the walls and you fill the interiors with your accoutrements, and these soft partitions divide, and this is a kind of a high rise. Yeah, this is a drawing showing this kind of very dense world. So I will go to my work. I will show quite many small houses, and then a few kind of works which are more public in nature. But I have always, so as a kind of a thematic, my interest is really also therefore in this relationship between the inside and the outside. How do we think of our everyday in relation to our behavior? in terms of how we move around and how we live. This is a series of drawings that we made for a housing study in Malaysia, where the brief was for a really dense kind of density, so about a 4.2 density. So we thought to make the circulation the kind of something that all the inhabitants share. And they would move around on the periphery. And it also meant that the periphery would be where the laundry, the entrances, and also where they could bump into each other and where you would play in relation to. So in this scheme, it was a stepped kind of section because plants generally love the sun and the rain. And then the humans, where they, that kind of a shared zone where they meet in between would be in that kind of circulation. A dense plan where the living would shape the interiors, and the interiors in that sense would be very open, but it would be through how you arrange the furniture that you would use the different parts of the interior. And in that project, it was along a river. So the idea that over time, the scale of and the growth of the trees would become the everyday of the inhabitant also. These scenes of the open ground floor where various activities flow. And right in the middle of on the equator where this part of the world is, plants thrive naturally. They just grow with the abundant rain and sun. So now I move on to a series of terrace houses. This would be where it would be kind of in the 1950s, in the 1920s, that would be how most people would have lived in small houses. So this house, I will show now a series of scenes of how these houses were lived and built and thought about. So in this scene, this is a 1950s house which is now being reconstructed. So in Singapore, the workers generally on the construction site come from, at this point, Bangladesh, India, Myanmar, and while we are constructing, they are also where they live and they work. So the inhabitants of the new house. So on a Sunday, they are making their lunch. They come. These workers generally, where they come from, they would be farmers, and they all know how to in a way make their own food. So the house, as it's finished, they start moving. They start moving in. And in this project, the foreman is from China, and there are various workers here who have actually worked all over Middle East and different parts of South and Asia, following as how Rodolphe said, as the economy changes, the workers will follow them. If they go back home, they would have very big farmlands, and their everyday would be that the room would just be a place to sleep, and their activity would be, their life would be in relation to the farming world. And in this project, the clients, had a few restaurants, so they wanted a terrazzo floor. So manually, the worker here smashed the glass, and we transform it into a terrazzo floor. And in this house, we communicated obviously through the drawings, because my Mandarin is very limited, and the workers generally don't speak English. And in this small terrace house, the walls are all curved, and the way that you move through, there would be a myriad of endless ways to move. And the spaces, the new house is a kind of a shape which is detached from the walls to allow the air to move through, and it's raised very high from the ground, and the air would therefore move through, below, and up, and beyond. And in this drawing, there are some parts where the walls, both sides of the party walls are free from the house itself, and some scenes. So this, I guess I'm also trying to say is that in building this is something that is really new for the workers, something really new also for me, and it can come together in a way. There is a kind of a shared idea of how to make things. So this was the first cast. So the whole staircase was all done in a kind of in the formwork and stripped after that. And this huge mess that the construction site is. So yeah, the rice cooker starts moving in. And to make the curving wall, it was a very simple diagram. So it was not, in a way, it was a different idea of how to make, not an idea of kind of a precision where everything must be kept to a certain control, but a kind of a loose idea that as long as we didn't cut any brick, we would lay the brick. And the rice cooker moves up as the building goes higher. And on the roof, we come up to the new sky. So in the 1950s, when this estate was first built, it would have been for also workers. It was a kind of a workers and civil servant housing, but they would have been developed as an estate, all 2 stories and all homogeneous. And if you can see, there are these vents above the windows. When they were first built, they were built for natural ventilation, and they would be quite shallow, about maybe 15 meters or so. But the transformation where now in each of these estates, they get rebuilt into these bigger houses, they also become much deeper. And therefore, if you were to fully shut them, they would really require a mechanical ventilation because the humidity is extremely high in Singapore. So again, this scene where even when they have food, and actually on this construction site, there would be very many different groups of workers from different countries, and they cook different ways of cooking. And even the worker on the right, who is a very senior worker, doesn't really want to be with the younger workers who are from a different time. So actually there are it would be many different kinds of people that are coming together with very different kind of inclinations. This house is called between a tree and a drain. So towards the back, there's a kind of a drainage reserve, but the back is where the kitchens usually are, and here you would have a very different kind of feeling with the smell of the neighborhood. And in this house, you are like in between spaces, small spaces. It's also east-west, so the sun will rise on the east and it will move through the house. And it also means that in the interior of the house, the everyday is almost never the same because the spaces are always changing in relation to the sun and the clouds and the rain. On the roof, which is a kind of a shed, and then looking up, and the canopies, which are very important. This is another project. It's called House with the Mango Trees. So this is also another house built after the war, after the Second World War. But again, it's another row. And this one is even more in the suburban area. And in this house, we start from the roof. I'll take you on a walk. And the walk and the meander is very much how I also think our everyday is that we are moving in through things. And after 6 months, the plants that was planted on various levels of the roof started coming down from the roof, and all the rooms are open to there are planters on every level. A kind of a section. So the long house is made into a scale of the person who is moving through the spaces. And in that long, narrow row, it's called like a terrace house. The body moves always in relation to the walls into the spaces, and the body turns away and in many ways. So this moving in relation to as how you're walking and how you're experiencing the space changes the house from just in a way, let's say a big house, to something that is very varied, and the house in a way carries on a kind of a experience of the set of different kinds of spaces throughout the house. So these are various cross sections cut, and if you can see, the cross sections are really very varied, and the plant and the rain permeates through even in the deepest part of the house. And unlike the previous project where the walls were detached, in this case, the new structure carries the different levels, and you actually go very near the walls. So as you come in a kind of a big space, and then the spaces go from, it keeps kind of a contrasting, but a kind of a continuous flow. And again, the idea that how the natural environment becomes part of the interior as you experience it. And these kind of windows, which are part of like these scenes which catch the eyes. So in this deep part, yeah, even the sun, which is part of the interior. It also means the rain would also always be experienced as you use the house, and the kind of diagonal views that are introduced. In scenes down to the ground, and then from the bedroom, the surroundings really become part of the interior visually. Diagonal views through the spaces, and then going up. So the house has, in a way, no elevation, but the house is open and to the trees, but the trees also become the experience of the neighborhood. And this is a kind of a zooming out of that whole environment. But so it's going to this construction site would involve me walking through the neighborhood. And in a way, I felt that also what we made was something like the continuation of this kind of variety of experience as you are walking along the streets into the house. This is a project in a shop house area. So the shop houses, these shop houses date back to the 1920s. So it's almost 100-year-old. So this estate is built with these red tile shop houses, which date back to the 100 years. And then surrounding it would be this housing, the HDBs, and all new apartments which have been built. So these shop houses are under conservation. The shop houses date back to a time from the 19th century onwards during the colonial period. So a kind of a combination of Chinese typology with an idea that the British brought to connect the city. So we again start from the roof, a scene from this new roof that I've introduced at the rear of the shop houses. So the shop houses have a back lane, and in this scene is from the back lane where under the conservation guidelines, the rear, you can transform them to a kind of the maximum plot ratio. The expanded mesh is where my project lies, and we made the rear a kind of a very permeable screen, and the rooms are detached from the rear and from the surrounding. This section shows the 1920s facade, a courtyard, and then the rear, and then the mesh at the rear. But as the transformation here is from, in a way, a room where you are enclosed by the party walls to then a courtyard where the sun and the rain comes in, and you literally walk through this experience. And then at the rear is a series of glass rooms that has kind of the air moving through them. And this model shows that kind of from the timber structure, the brick and timber shop house to the new extension. View from the extension looking back towards the old roof. And then these gaps that we introduced, and then these plants that after 6 months, yeah, literally the plants just grow, and you are then every day as the wind moves through, as the leaves die, as it rustles, you are part of a kind of a very living environment. And this view is from the old shop house. And as the section shows, the street would, in the old days, would have been cars. So the street was kind of a scale enough for human flow. And then there was a kind of a 5-foot way, a covered sheltered walkway, then the shop house, and then the new extension we should put at the back, and in between that hanging garden. And this plan shows the old and the new. The structure was the old timber structure would have been about 6 meters, because this was a kind of a size that you could span the timber beams across economically. And then on the right, we introduced this new steel structure that was put in to carry the new hanging staircases. And then the staircases over them, there were little roofs. So they become these hanging gardens, yeah. And towards the front is the new extension, view from the old court, through the courtyard. And then this is the old pavement from the 1920s, which were pressed tiles, caustic tiles, when Singapore still used to actually make things. But this would also have been built with migrant workers, the labor from China, who were encouraged to come to grow Singapore. So in a way, Singapore has always been a kind of a place, or Southeast Asia, where there has been a huge flow of workers coming to, in a way, seek to make a living. But in this scene here, this would be the 5-foot way, where it is a kind of a covered, sheltered way, where it becomes something that the public uses, but it belongs to the owner. And this was a kind of a law that was introduced by the British in the 19th century. It was a kind of it's called the 5-foot way, but it was so that you could have a comfortable passage through the city in the hot and wet weather. And this scale makes for a very lively kind of environment, because at every 5 meters you would have a different house, a different encounter. And in that era, it would all be shops, and the streets would be filled with activities. I moved to the tea house. This is in the north, and to the left is a reservoir from the 19th century, which was devised by the British. And in this case, the client, a very young man, wanted to live near the nature reserve and the reservoir. So this housing estate dates back again to the 1950s, built for civil servants, and now undergoing quite major transformation. So now the transformations are house by house. And he wanted to make a house where he could garden. And this is the scene of the roof after about 1 year, where the plants have started taking over. And beyond is the nature reserve. And in this estate where everybody is building now 3-story houses, we built a kind of a really modest and almost invincible house. And the top is the biggest garden. And the plants have grown from 2 stories to the roof, and they're coming up. And so the idea of living is, again, very different, not just to live on the inside, but to live together, always thinking and being in the everyday with the plants. But it also means that it is a house where it is endless work for him. And it was an ambition that he had. He's actually like a kind of a IT and a doctor, but he wanted to plant. So he says walking around the house, he literally cannot stop gardening, because gardening, if once you start, it is a kind of a continuous activity. This is the shared space where him and the father and the brother, they and their spouses, they live together in a very small house. And in this drawing, which shows the neighborhood where every house is filled more and more with furniture, his house is also filled more and more with plants, but also it's also their everyday, therefore is in relation to an environment that changes. And the rooms, in this case, from the kitchen to the rear also goes through the back. And the rooms are small and they have big openings that look out through to the shared spaces and beyond. So the idea of that permeability. Yeah, in this diagram, you move following the side is in a valley. So the house literally hugs the valley and you go down to the lower part, and which is the middle area, but the rooms, which are very small, all look into it and all look into the different gardens. But at the same time, the shaping of Singapore is also very driven, or very much in relation to the guidelines. Since the time of the British, where the city was continuously being planned and reshaped with this 5-foot way, the back lane, and the size of the plots. The size of the plots in Singapore are also therefore very controlled. There is no way that, let's say, a single owner can change the size of the lot. But they introduce each time this guideline. So the latest guideline is such that now there is a kind of a maximum envelope where within the envelope, the owners and the architects are free to make as much as they can within. So it generally means that then the neighborhoods are all now being mutated to follow these big envelopes. This was the original house. It was a 1-story house below the ground. And actually what we built, even though it was 2 stories, was not higher than the 1-story house. And the old wall with the new wall that was just put over it with this very light steel structure. This is with the client. I'll show one more small project and then we will move on a bit. So this one actually was a very early project, and I wanted to show this just to show that scale of the transformation. So this is right in the heart of the old city of Singapore, and the project that we did was a really tiny shop house right down there. Also, it was also under conservation. So the idea of conservation, and which is the only way perhaps that these small houses will remain in the city, because land value has changed tremendously. So if left to their inclination, all this would be demolished and it will all become high rises. So the client bought the house on the left, and they would have to make the house to follow the house that was on the right. And the size of this house, the land is about 30 meters square, and the width of the room is about 3.5 meters. So next door, which was a shop selling fabrics, by the time you rolled out the bale of the fabric, that was the dimension of the room already, and the dimension of the house. And it was an area prone to flooding. And then this back lane, when we started, this building was still there, and then there was a hotel under construction. So again, the envelope of this project was given by the guidelines. So the front had to be restored to the original condition, and the rear to a maximum of these 5 stories. So our project literally responded, but also imagine that how a small house could feel quite different if you created a kind of a meander. And you would literally be moving around the rooms and through the rear to experience the house. And this scene was shown to the clients how within that, in this space, the space of a room also included the surroundings, the banana trees and the scenery that was beyond, and the rockeries that were in front, things which became part of the interior, but were literally on the outside. So as we built, and that was my first encounter with a group of Thai workers who literally, again, we did not speak too much through English, but really through the structural drawing. So taking the drawings they build. And then the structure, which was a concrete structure, came up. And a new thing hovered over the old building. And then this split levels where the house was felt to be physically, experientially more through these differences in levels. And this scene, which is not to be found anymore. So this was a 70-year-old carpenter, but it also probably meant that he had a kind of a lineage to Shanghai, because in the early days, many Shanghainese carpenters came to Singapore in the 19th century, in the early 20th century. And here was a very senior Chinese carpenter who by now had become naturalized as Singaporean, drawing one-to-one details in a very precise way that also knew about the wood, the timber that was to be found in Singapore. It would no more be this kind of discussion, because the new workers really have not that kind of skill. So this is the house after completion. I'll take you on a walk through it. So after the house is completed, the authorities, the planning authority comes to check that you follow the guidelines. You walk inside to the very low den, and then you come into a very high space. You take a walk around the courtyard back into the old space, and then overlooking the roof. And then towards the back, you move around to the small room. So these are very tiny rooms that if you stretch out, literally you are the scale of the room. So it's a building that's very close to you. And then towards the back lane. So in terms of the overall size, it's about 100 meters square total. But through that diversity and this variety of movement, the house feels really experientially very rich. But it was also for the clients a new world. Prior to this, they were staying in an apartment very far away from the city. And now they were living and working in the city. So for the wife, she would take a stroll every evening back from the work through the city as the sun fell. And the living in the city, even though it was very small, the experience was a kind of a richness that is the city. This is a house on an island off Singapore. Singapore was a few hundred, an archipelago of a few hundred small islands. From the time of the British to now, the islands were all covered over with sand until it is now mainly one big island with a few small islands. So this is one small island that's still off Singapore. And the house where it is built on is on extension, is on a landfill that is off this small island of Singapore. So in this house is a kind of a gated community where there are no fences, but it's also next to the sea. And we make a kind of a shape where it has no front and no back, no beginning and no end. You continuously walk around. This is a drawing of the roof, which is a kind of a rolling landscape. And here you are literally quite far from other things. And your view, surrounding the whole house is a kind of a open veranda where the sea can move through you. But the curving wall, the curving facade also is very different from a kind of an angular surrounding. It is more open, and the edges are always going away. Then on the second level are this series of timber rooms. If you slide away all the doors, and the doors are all, and the windows are all made very big so that the air moves through. But these lines are just showing that kind of a breeze. And this breeze is obviously continuous, and therefore enlivens the house and gives the house a great feeling. So within the big house, 4 main courtyards are made, but also this kind of various spaces which are part of the house, but where you can do various things and are not so fixed, and as a kind of in-between spaces. So the doors slide away and you are able to move. Also, like the wind, you also are able to move in innumerable ways through the house. The ground, the level, the floor tilts gently, so that again you're also experiencing as if you're moving like on a landscape. From the rooms, these big openings to take in the exterior. These kind of huge spaces of the courtyards. So when the structure was finished, in a way that was kind of the ideal condition. There was as much that was open, and there was exterior as much as there was covered. These courtyards and the kind of scale of the sky that has been brought to become part of the interior space. So the house is right at the tip, and then this is like right at the edge of Singapore, the sea. So I now go to a very different project in Batam, which is to the south of Singapore. This is Indonesia. So it's a 40-minute ferry ride across to the south, to this island. And this island, there was a kind of a resort that was under construction next to the monsoon. You would really get like the very strong northeast monsoon winds. So when we started the project, a pool was already made for where the kids club would be. And we made a kind of a bamboo structure, which being a kids club where you could always endlessly move, and the way kids play and would be that they would always like to move and run and explore. So it's a space literally where you move continuously with no dead ends, and the lower level is much more intimate, and the upper level is a kind of an open space. So after we made our scheme, eventually they found a bamboo contractor, and these are the contractors that took the ferry from Bali actually to Batam, and then from Batam they came to Singapore to meet the client. They brought with them their model. We had made a model, but they literally built a model because this was the language for them, how they were makers. And literally from that model, they built on site using bamboo, which they had cut and floated in the river for about a few months to kill the termites, to kill the insects and all the various things that would be growing on the bamboo. And so it was a kind of an additive construction. The different sizes of bamboo for different kinds of things. So for the columns and the beams, they were 150 diameter. And then the smaller ones would be used for the flooring and the cladding. And it was a very manual, but really fast construction, because it was something that they were really good at. This in a way is like a encounter with craftsmen, which is quite different. It's a different kind of craftsman, because this is something that they know with their hands. And it was also a very new experience, that literally with one material, you assemble everything. The lower part where the structure is stronger, also to make the different kind of enclosures, and then the beams. So here everything is made of bamboo except that green cement floor. And then after it's done, so the thing was to make this thatched roof spread out so that the rain would not effect would not get too much into the bamboo because the bamboo would not take the rain. But when the monsoon winds came, the various buildings around here are concrete buildings. The glass roofs would fly off, but this building is entirely permeable. So the wind would move through this building. And if the kids were running, the whole building would move with their body. So the responsiveness also became a kind of a quality, a very different kind of experience, very visceral in a different way. As they were making the thatch roof, they also started planting bamboo on the side. So literally, you can also take the bamboo to make the more and the alang-alang that they used to make on the roof. So in this scene, the balustrade would be from the bigger diameter bamboo that they sliced in half. And then the floor is a different part of the bamboo. And the nails are also bamboo nails because as the bamboo gets worn down, the nails would be worn together so they would not stick out. And then these knots that are pushed through to the other side. And they literally work with the axe and the knife and a cigarette in your mouth. Yeah, but it's the most natural thing. It's a very different kind of scenery of making. I want to now introduce a few scenes. When I first came to Singapore, which was in the early 1990s, I worked in an office for about 5 years, and this was in a shop house in Courtyard. So at that time, it still had the edge of, it still was falling apart, kind of a shop house. But already in that kind of a decay, plants were growing, and we would work. Over time, this courtyard was transformed to, every Friday, we would have these drinks and barbecue. We would shut the phone and not entertain the contractors or clients. But it also meant that to be comfortable, we would congregate and in the courtyard and enjoy our time together in a kind of a natural environment. This was in 2015. There was this really bad haze. The peat forest in Indonesia was burning, and this photo taken from the meteorological website showed how the air was being blown to Singapore and this whole region. We were literally covered in smoke. You could not see more than 300 mm away from each other. And every minute though, this smoke would be transforming. And this monsoon winds, which actually move all the way from the temperate down to the the tropical belt, right, was also how this area transformed for centuries. From before the Portuguese came, the Indian and the Arab traders and the Chinese traders would move in relation to the northeast and the southwest monsoons. So during different parts of the season, the year, the traders would move to and away from India and towards China and back and forth. And then also with that also was how the Portuguese and the Dutch and the British came and traded, and in a way also the way the economy grew. So this drawing shows the house that I grew up in, where on the ground floor plan, it was only had one room, and then the ground floor would be where you did many things, and then upstairs where it would be a kind of a series of rooms. Yeah. So this would be a kind of a house from that compound house type, where the ground floor, you would have the water tank where the dogs would be. You also would have a kind of one kind of a living space, another kind of space, and then, but divided by making use of the alignment of the columns, this could be how you could live in that kind of an open environment, but that's sheltered. This is a friend's house, and in the friend's house, he had over time bought other adjoining lots, which this is a house in a kind of a valley. But in between the houses, he had let the trees grow. And his house also meant that it was also a jungle. You could live through walking through that jungle, and it just takes about a 5 minutes walk, and you start sweating, and it's so humid because it's really wet. But it also means that there's a kind of a vitality. You know, you feel really alive because you have that kind of an encounter. It's a very different kind of a aliveness from being in a kind of an air-conditioned environment. I will show 3 more projects, yeah, and they're kind of a variety. So this one is the food center, a hawker center. And this drawing shows how it's a 1-story pavilion with no walls. So it just has roofs, but then it's also surrounded by really big trees that are growing. After, again, almost 6 months, the plants which are on the roof have covered the roof and also starts coming down all over. And you're in a kind of a landscape which is completely surrounded with this changing, thriving atmosphere. Before we started, the trees were not there, but a lot of trees were transplanted. And the hawker center, the eating is meant to be at the periphery, so you will always enjoy a bit of the surrounding. And it's a concrete structure which comes down to as low as 2 meters, so it becomes close to you to give you a kind of a shade. Yeah, the view of when it was first finished and the trees were just put in. And on a Saturday night, it will be filled with people. And in the middle would be the cooking area with their exhaust. These are many, many different stalls selling many different kinds of food. So this kind of way of eating publicly with many different individual stalls is something that started happening in Singapore from the 19th century. And in this section, it's a kind of a big roof, and then the small stalls which have this exhaust, and then the eating areas. So this thing generally 12 meters, so always you're not too far from the edge of the building. And in the plan, it's a meandering kind of experience, so that you are moving, looking at selecting food. You could be eating from 5 different stalls, and then you would find a place to sit, which is either outside or inside. And then the shape of this big roof. So this project was done with my associates from Japan, KUU. But yeah, and the roof. So it's a kind of an upturned beam structure which carries the plants above, and on the ground, it just goes here and there and makes you meander. So concrete construction is, as you can say, it's a construction which is in a way very rough and very rudimentary. It requires in a way less skill than the bamboo structure. And then from the pond, the building. But it also sits in this sits right in the heart of Singapore. You cannot see it's this shape that's covered over now by the plants. And towards the left would be the greenhouses, the new greenhouses. So this is the new gardens of Singapore. It's a kind of a tourist garden. And then this blue of sea is the Marina Barrage. It used to be the beginning of Singapore, but it has been converted into a barrage. And this in a way is the tourist scene of Singapore, which would be these glass houses and then these high rises. But in this kind of scenery, the exterior is always something outside, and the everyday is in the air condition in the 24 degrees. So even though the weather has become two different weathers. Exterior and interior is two different kind of climates in Singapore now. In contrast, here where the smell of the satay can be smelled, this barbecuing that happens in a food court can be smelled. You can smell it, very far away. And this was the original satay stalls where literally you skewer the meat, and the person who cooks and the person who eats are next to each other, and then you would be enjoying it in the atmosphere of the evening or in the outdoors. Yeah. And then this was how a kind of a typical scene, which is still around, this semi-outdoor covered, but many different stalls. So it's a very lively, very exciting, something that is really quite particular to this environment, because obviously you are also sweating and you are enjoying the food, the hot steaming food together with the sweat, and there's a kind of a feeling that comes with that. Yeah. And then this hawker center amongst the plants. So even if you look deep inside, your scenery is always with the surrounding, and it's really comfortable because the plants change the temperature to a kind of a breathable thing. Yeah. And this one, I go up north to the Godown, an art center in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And for this project, I would fly about 40 minutes. And then before you land, you would encounter about 5 minutes of the scenery of all palms. So in almost there's so much land that has been cultivated with all palms. So the monoculture, which was introduced during the colonial era, at that time it was rubber. Then immediately towards the end of the colonial era, palm oil during the Second World War, the First World War and the Second World War, rubber was on the rise. And then after that, after the war, the palm oil, and then this kind of monoculture continues. But this monoculture is in a way one of the wealth of the nations. Yeah? In this project, which is right in the heart of the old Kuala Lumpur, which is the capital of Malaysia, we were thinking how to make a project where you work to make art. You are in an environment where you are part of the outdoors, but you will have some shelter. So we were thinking to make these very light metal walls that were detached from the structure. So the go down is a series of concrete floors, terraces, with walls that are detached from it. And then it overlooks a kind of an old warehouse. And this veranda-like space is part of the interior, and this is during our art show. You are literally in the city without walls, but there are walls to give you some shade and protection from the rain. And then these kind of spaces that are made between the floor and the wall. So it's like a shirt which you wear, which has space in between so that you can breathe. And then the rain is also part of that encounter. The rain literally becomes part of the spaces. And when we started the project, there was these fig trees, which we think are also about maybe 50 to 70 years old, really old fig trees, which the buildings are nestled around. And the building is hidden by these trees, and then this is the scene towards the old city. And unlike Singapore, which has very strict zoning, it's the way that the city is growing here, and both nations are from the same time. In a way, these cities were all colonial outposts, and they have been transforming from after the war into, but in KL, the old and the new jumbled together in really a really big mix. So the project starts with this old godown, which is about 100 years old, and the godown as a building type also is from the Portuguese airtime, because the go down would be a place to store foods before you transport them away. So a roof garden, which I actually carried seeds from Singapore, and this was propagated through seeds, where you sit in the middle of the city surrounded by the tall buildings. The building nestles within these high rises, and it's open completely on the ground, and the new building hangs. Also, as we were making the old building, we started by stripping away the plaster, and it was an old clay, soft brick and lime plaster building. But the workers in this case, which were from Indonesia, Surabaya, started using it as their home. Within the old go down, we assembled a hardwood structure to make a gallery. And then in this case, the husband and wife would come while their kids will be looked after by their grandparents. They would come here to earn money. And they had never really done an off-form structure before, but their kind of naturalness was really something I really enjoyed in how they make. Yeah. And the new building, after the structure was done. So this would be the finish. So the soffit itself would be the ceiling. The floor would be the finish. There would be no more work. You would just be adding on the metal walls. The drawing shows how the all go down to the right, which is one big, huge structure, to the top, which is one huge structure. And then a new structure that sort of makes different kind of curves in relation to different things. I wanted to introduce a kind of a space. And then if something is round, there's always some space that's around the round, around the curve. And in this kind of environment, yes, on a really hot day, your skin would start to glisten. And then within the all go down, which we replastered the exterior in lime, and then the rear inside we removed the plaster. But even within that big space, so in the past this would have been used to maybe store rice. It is not far from the river, so from here it was a kind of import-export storage space where it would then be shipped to the river before it would be shipped to other parts of the world. But even within the big structure, by introducing this gallery and the different kind of openings, you can be further or very near the different kind of spaces. So we reopen up all the previous openings and make them as pure openings that could be entirely opened up. And then the view from the new wing, and then space for the rainwater to flow through the side. And the shadowy space is what is comfortable. And that's the issue in living in the equatorial area. The body is very comfortable when there is shade from the trees or from the canopy. In the relationship it makes with the surroundings. So the behind is the reserve, and the plants are coming towards this side, and kind of big openings up. Yeah, and the views through. During the first show, again, as an art gallery, it's very challenging because it has become normal or conventional to make white boxes where everything will be entirely interior. And the challenge for this space and for the different artists would be how would they be making things in relation to the city? Because the encounter would always be with the neighborhood, not just with the art and not just with the space. Yeah. So in this show, in this lady's art, which was about shadows, collected and imprinted onto fabric, she in a way really responded to the space, letting the air move through and also just these ghosts of memories which were imprinted on this fabric. But you also, in this encounter, you are physically there in the space with the neighborhood. I will take you now on a walk away from the building. So this would have been the old go down, and maybe and this street would have been used, a million times by different peoples over the 100 years and before. And further away would be the old streets, and this city which grew with migrants, also building the city literally with their hands, now would be a different group of migrants, workers, who the Nepalese, the Indonesians, and the buildings are less looked after. They are literally falling apart. So the windows are disappearing, but then in lieu are the sarongs. And they have become pure openings where the rain is coming in. Also this contest with and if they become offices for the non-migrants, then suddenly this aircon takes over, because as they get bigger, they become less permeable, and therefore you need this huge amount of machines. There are still, however, these kind of shelters which are permeable for activities. At the same time, in that city, the old trade of cooking and eating along the streets is continuing. Where in the evening it changes and the whole city becomes alive with cooking, small lanes with food, and in the morning a different kind of trade. So it's a living city. So in a way, how could this project work? It was also, perhaps it can work because there's this city that allows this kind of way of living. And even making and selling needs. Okay, this is a last project, and just quickly go through a really small house on the land that's about 12 meters by about 6 meters. So it's for a family of 5, and this is from the back lane. Again, it would have been a 1950s terrace house. We made in the beginning a house with a roof, and then some timber rooms within that roof. The plan shows open space on the ground level with columns. The second level with timber rooms with a gallery around it. And the top is a kind of a roof. So it's a very simple kind of a diagram. As it's finished, it's an open space on the ground. The kitchen. And then again, more of that. And then from the second level, the neighborhood, this place, the scene of the church, is really part of the indoors. Yeah. And then these rooms, which is our timber rooms. And then here is where it's more intimate if you close it off. But as they leave, we start by throwing seeds and a few plants. After 1 year, a new garden has emerged on the roof. And then you are within this kind of a scenery. And then over that period of time, within this 1 year from then to now, they send me, every few weeks, new pictures, like new plants, new fruits, new vegetables coming. They are also a very different kind of family where the surrounding is part of their everyday. They sent me this photo very early, and here the kids literally are, I thought they were weeding, but actually no, they're digging and extracting caterpillars that are eating up, ravaging all their plants. Below the plants, they take it out, and then there's more of these worms that again keep eating their plants. They give up after a while, and they realize that it's pointless, and they leave. And with your everyday in that kind of a space study, their beds, the thing, they brush their teeth in relation to the neighborhood. And then during this period, they start working from home during the COVID. They go to school and come back, but they walk now through the garden and the house is one thing. And then the scenery is of a very different kind of house. Yeah. So thank you. That's my talk for now. Do you want me to stop the screen share?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much, Ling, for a fantastic lecture. And then I'm going to introduce you to Joan on my right and Juan on the left.
Nice to
There are
meet
a
you.
couple of young faculty members here at the School of Architecture, and they have questions and comments for you.
Okay.
With that, Joel and Juan.
Hi. So, you know, in a lecture with somebody that you haven't seen lecture before, you're always a little bit surprised by what you get, right? So I think that before I came into this lecture and I hadn't heard you speak, I knew your work, I've seen your work. And I would have probably wanted to talk about the kind of the architectural language or vocabulary, as Jaime had described, that you use in your projects, because there is obviously some consistency there, right? Like between the open spaces, kind of the material palette of concrete, all the way down to things like the steel grate on transparent floors, which are a kind of device that is very interesting and unusual, but also something that you use a lot. But as you lectured, I realized that I was seeing other kinds of through lines. And so you have to pardon me, it might take me a second to formulate this, but I was struck by not actually, I mean, you know, I love your work, it's very beautiful, and the images that you use of it are beautiful, but I was really struck by a couple of other ways that you represent constantly in the presentation, right? And so you have, of course, the drawings, right? Which, even when they're about the architecture, are much more about the occupation of the architecture, or they're almost like semi-narratives of people walking around, of you know, clusters of people at the hawker centers, and all the sections there are like illustrations of people moving and things like that. So that's sort of one through line that I thought was interesting. And then the second one that was really consistent about the way you represent your work is to show the workers who are making the projects at all the, in almost every case, right? More so even than the clients living in them, as if there's something about the making of it, you know, by the hands that make it is somehow like clearly very important to you, both in how you think about the projects and how you describe the projects. And I'm not sure if those two things are necessarily connected, but I started to try to see what the relationship is between that sort of mode of representation and drawing type, and then your decision to highlight the workers. And I think there's something to me about like, you know, the reason that I might ask less about the language of architecture and more about these is because there is something about you letting go, I think, of the architecture as the primary thing and privileging other kinds of experiences, you know, through the architecture. The architecture becomes a kind of backdrop in some sense, but also there's a kind of looseness with which you describe the architecture because of these other modes. And so I'm not sure exactly what the question is there so much as it's a kind of observation, but one which I'm hoping you can tie these two strands together for us a little bit, and talk about, you know, the looseness with which you prescribe architecture and represent it, I guess.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah. No. It's a really good observation, and it's always been a kind of a struggle to actually how to talk about working, actually how to talk about our work. And I know that I mean, when we study as a student, our, in a way, the trying to flesh out an idea is really I think paramount. And then there was always a struggle when you make work to to have this idea that carries the project. But the drawings that you talk about, a lot of them are done after the project. Obviously, the structure drawings are, the engineers will just do their drawing and I would do my drawings. And when I make drawings, I make them at about generally 1 to 50, 1 to 75, the plans and the sections. I would have very little details actually. And the details are maybe 1 to 5. Over time, I found that the workers don't really read the drawings here anyway. And the structure, I really like personally as a thing, I like the fact that what we make is what we live in, or how we encounter the thing. So therefore the structure is very important. So therefore the structural drawings, which are actually 1 to 100, are literally what the contractors have. And then almost every other project, it's a new person that I meet with on site. I haven't worked with them before. Even if the bosses I know, the workers are new. So this relationship is very real. And if I wanted to do one-to-one details and work with that, I would literally die. Yeah. So the other way is to, work with. And then grow close with these people that I work with, because I go to site, obviously, the site is part of my work. I have the model and the drawings with the clients, and after that, the project transforms when we work. So that's why, when I talked about the work, I literally also know that, because that's part of how I work, I think. And what you are saying about occupation, yes, I think architecture, the way that we study and the way that it has become discussed in the media, has become very much about the thing as a thing. But as you also know, once you live and as you are sitting in the space that surrounds you, is how we are affected by our surroundings. And I think our childhoods are very important, because we carry with that our first encounter with the world. And our encounter with the world is with humans, but also with our surroundings, right? Yeah. So this transformation that that our encounters have with us, I want to bring that up into discussion, because I really believe that what we make shapes the everyday of everybody, including ourselves. So if we bring that into discussion, which is what this platform could be, right? Then it's very different from talking about how successful the idea is. Because almost everything that we make creates new issues. Like the last house that I showed, I was really worried, of course, because it was so small that if it rains, it would mean that a lot of the space would be really wet. They have been amazing. They really took that as an opportunity to think about living, that they could live with this kind of puddles, with these kind of encounters, rather than to say that it's a problem. Yeah. And because the moment the idea that the inside and the outside is two separate spaces, then everything becomes a problem, because like a millipede can, literally you can have a breakdown over that, which is a very different idea of the environment. So that thinking that the architecture is related to a bigger environment is, yes, what I'm interested in. And therefore, if you're thinking of it in relation to a bigger environment, it is not just the idea, but then it's also about even as you said, the drawing showing how you walk through it. Yes.
First of all, thank you for sharing your work. They have a very clear identity, I think, that comes through with the local character. But there's this humbleness, I would say, and they read very honest. Like, I don't think you photoshopped any of those photographs that you showed. So it's very raw, and I appreciate that. I am curious about two aspects of your projects. One is about materials and the other about local climate. So you describe your projects, interestingly, more by the non-permanent aspects, like you focus on the circulation and movement and the change of the experience, the light, the wind, and there's this very ephemeral quality that defines these spaces. And I think there's a contrast with some of the material choices, like concrete, which is very permanent. Although you are able to soften it with form and geometry, curvature and plan and other moves. I'm curious as to how you approach these material choices. Is it about establishing that contrast? I do see that there's also wood involved and bamboo and metal. I think these three have a more dynamic quality in that acoustically they're different in texture and reflectivity. So more so than concrete. So I'm curious as to that approach. And then the other question I had, so your buildings are very porous and open, as you mentioned, and it's about merging with the outside. And you're able to achieve this in a very hot and humid climate. And I mean, we kind of have that here in Miami, although not the same, but I'm curious as to how you're able to manage the comfort level and make these spaces habitable. And I do realize that I think in Singapore, there is this culture that accepts and almost has adjusted to these conditions. Whereas in Miami, we sort of resisted and we over-insulate the walls. There's a lot of vapor barriers, AC, air conditioning everywhere. So I'm curious if you've also worked in other climates or cultures and how that has affected this design challenge, I would say, of letting the outside in.
Thank you. Yes, thanks for the question. It's really good. I think the two questions are interrelated. The moment, I mean, I've only been practicing for about 20 over years, but obviously the house that I grew up in is now as old as I am, which is about 52 years. The house was built, the one that I showed where I grew up, when I was built, when I was born actually, yeah. The thing is that I'm sure there is also quite similar over there, but the moment you build something, it starts deteriorating. And the whole discussion of practice of learning, right? The idea of the codes is to almost stop that deterioration. So that's why, you know, we invent all kinds of waterproofing, all kinds of materials that almost supposedly never deteriorates, and in a way that was cement's selling point at one point, right? That you could plaster and it would dry out really fast and it's really strong. However, the issue is that it's almost impossible to do that, because if there's a moisture that's left inside the brick, it will want to come out, and cement is not permeable, so then it will start cracking. And so the whole experience that I had when we were starting to make projects was that after a while, you would have issues with dampness, you would issue with cracks and then water getting in, and then the cracks would get bigger. And if you painted, the paint you would have to repaint every few years. And Singapore, if you move around, and why it looks so, in a way, presentable is because it's a law. You have to repaint every 5 years. So that's why if you go to KL, where in the scenes that I show of KL, which of the buildings deteriorating, which a lot of them have been painted over with acrylic paints or with cement plaster, they literally just grow mold and they grow algae, so that the surfaces literally are alive with mold and algae, which in our idea is a negative thing. The learning thing of doing that project in KL it was my first encounter using lime plaster. And lime plaster is something up to the 1920s was the generic, from the Taj Mahal to the pyramids to Malaysia to Indonesia, the poor villages. That would be the material, and it's a breathing material, right? It doesn't crack, it sort of bonds itself back together. But it's almost an unknown trade in Singapore. It takes too long to dry, so you won't have it in times for the contract. It's a kind of a long meander talking about materials, but in Singapore, you cannot do bamboo or timber. After the fires after the war, it was the opportunity to introduce a code. So everything has to be in concrete. But concrete, in a way, is probably the material that once you cast is highly stable. So then you will have less discussions about but as a material, it ages straight away. The moment you finish the building, it starts catching the mold, it starts growing. So I guess if you want to be open to the surrounding, it means that you have to be open to living with the aging. And I think that's part of this issue of how we personally ourselves age, because we can arrest our age by various techniques, or we grow old. And what does it mean to grow old? I think it's a really interesting thing, because for so long, there is a huge industry around looking young, acting young, but maybe it's actually living that we have to grow an industry around. Living with things, living with ourselves, and my projects also have been a kind of many trials and errors. Every new project creates new problems, if you want to say, because they have become really used to living in a 4-room that you can turn on the air condition. Actually, it's 90% of people, a huge amount of Singaporeans live in the air condition. They literally would have big issues now not living like that, the 24 degrees. So if you do an art gallery in Singapore, the brief for the competition is 24 degrees. So it doesn't matter wherever you go, it's that same environment. Yeah. So actually I am more interested in still trying to think within our time, which is a very different time from the 1950s, how to live with our condition, because obviously it is really getting much hotter. There are much more buildings, and the buildings are all using aircon, so the aircon is generating heat. So it's a struggle, actually. I think the struggle is such that if you try, your body will also learn to adapt, and then you will, obviously you need shade, you need plants, you need various things, but what is really quite amazing are the monsoon winds. When the breeze blows through, it just gives you a nice feeling. Yeah, of course it's very hard if you are drawing and then the air is moving through or something sometimes, but then there are ways that you have to adapt. So I would say that, yeah.
Very, very clear. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Hao, for a wonderful lecture. And I just want to thank you for allowing us to share with your humanism with us. I'm really taken by the fact that your biography affects sustainability, architecture, beauty, and social utility. To me, those are the lessons that I'm taking with you. For the rest of the people that are joining us now, don't forget that on February 2nd, we'll be joined by a Pritzker Prize winner from Japan, Toyo Ito. That will be February 2nd at 12 p.m. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, Ling.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.